Hello, everyone. Andy Jacob here with the DotCom Magazine Entrepreneur Spotlight Series. I have a very unique show today. You know, we love sitting around at DotCom Magazine and talking about what's happening in science fiction. Everybody knows that watches the show. And we were sitting around, and there's so many great things going on in sci-fi right now. And one of the people that's really leading the pack in an old school sci-fi way is Mr. Jeffrey Morris, and he is the founder and CEO of FutureDude Entertainment. I love it so much, I call him the FutureDude. Jeffrey is really in the middle of it. He's doing so many great things. He's a writer, a director, a designer, and he's really leading the path and leading the way with science fiction films, TV projects, with what I'm calling this old school sci-fi, but we're going to get all into it. Jeffrey, welcome to the DotCom Magazine Entrepreneur Spotlight Series.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the chance to be here.
Yeah, you have such a unique look, such an interesting way you look at science fiction. So many people are following you and looking at what you're doing. But before we get started, let's pull the lens back to 30,000 feet and tell us about FutureDude Entertainment.
Sure. Let's see. Well, I founded the company back in 2010. It's actually, the actual name of the company is Morris FutureWorks. And it's something that I had been developing for a number of years. I have kind of three major interests in terms of my life's journey, life's work. I'm very interested in science and science, engineering, architecture, those sorts of things. I was a big science aficionado growing up from childhood on, always studying something, oceanography, space exploration, that sort of thing. But I also wanted to become a storyteller, and so as a storyteller and artist, I started learning how to illustrate and design. I designed spaceships and props and all that sort of thing. That was something that I spent a lot of my formative years. I worked with, I had some mentors, people like Sid Mead and some others, designers, pretty cool stuff. And then I figured, okay, so I'm interested in science. I'm interested in storytelling and illustration and that sort of thing. But I knew I needed an infrastructure to put it all together. So I was very concerned about being an entrepreneur, and so I really spent a lot of time understanding business planning and development and budgeting and all that sort of thing. And it's interesting because people have asked me a lot, like, how do you get to do what you do? And what I tell everyone is that the creative part is a very small percentage of it. It's actually the business side, being an entrepreneur, that really enables it all to happen. So I launched the company in 2010, bringing those three focal points together. And the goal initially was to do graphic novels and comic books and that sort of thing, animation. But that marketplace really changed in around 2013, 2014, with the advent of digital. And my long-term goal was to make movies. And so we pivoted in 2015 and decided to focus entirely on film and TV production. So that's where we are now. We've got our first big feature. It's called Persephone, which is in soft pre-production right now. Our target is to shoot in the fall for a release that would be sometime next year, late next year. And that's a big adventure to the nearest star. So and it's all realistic science, and we've got great advisors on the project, and the technology, everything is possible that we're doing. So we're very excited about it.
I love that. That's so great that everything's possible in the movie. That's really going to open people's minds up, because sometimes you watch these sci-fi movies and they're just out of the realm of possibility. There's no way that the science can actually happen, but you're sort of taking this new approach, which everybody's talking about. Let's talk about that. So, the things in the movie are actually possible. You must have some science experts that are helping you sort of go through the discussions about what's possible and what's not possible in the movie.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have advisors from NASA, Northrop Grumman, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, people there who I go to and I say, hey, would this really happen? How would this really work? How would this really function? And then it really informs the design and the plausibility of how we're developing and creating everything. So, so for example, we have a spaceship a lot of people don't understand, like in Star Wars, the way the spaceships fly around and everything, I call Star Wars a space fantasy. It's not really science fiction. It's not, there's not a lot of science there right now. It looks like it because they have technology, right? But I call that kind of a space techno fantasy in a lot of ways, right? Whereas something like 2001: A Space Odyssey, or the movie The Martian, Apollo 13, which is not really science fiction, it's really more of a docudrama, but those are depicting space travel in a way that could really happen, and that's what we're trying to do. We also have a big underwater story called Oceanus that we're doing. We did a short of that a few years back, and we're in development on a feature film of Oceanus right now too.
I love it. It's great. In the pre-interview, you mentioned Rod Serling. Rod was a great writer and producer, and he's sort of old school. And you've taken some thoughts or some ideas or some philosophies from the way that he would present his stories. Let's talk about that a little bit, because I'm a big Rod Serling fan. I loved him.
Yeah. Well, if you think about the Twilight Zone, and there was always these stories that were little metaphors for talking about the human condition, right? And it would always, he'd gut punch you at the end. You go, wow, okay, holy, wow, okay. I think that we are dealing. Also, Gene Roddenberry, if you go back to the original Star Trek, way back, he actually wanted to make a show that was about the 1960s and talk about the social issues and the problems and things that were going on then. But the networks were like, people don't want to see that. They want entertainment. So he said, okay, I'm going to reframe this as 300 years in the future. So in other words, he was dealing with the social issues of the time, but he was doing it in a science fiction context. It's the same thing Rod Serling was doing. And I think that's very much what our projects are. Persephone does have a talk about, at its core, climate change, exploring new worlds, bringing the problems of humanity from here. Do we repeat the same mistakes as we go forward into the future? Those sorts of questions and discussions. But what I will say, it's wrapped in a cool action adventure with lots of cool gadgets and technology and neat characters, and so it's always got to be about the people and the story. So that sort of thing. But I guess when I look back to what those stories were like back then in the 1960s, they made you think, and I feel like a lot of entertainment nowadays is trying to get you not to think, to turn your brain off. And what we want to do is reinvigorate and show you that having your brain switched on is actually quite fun and it's actually quite entertaining and enjoyable to engage with smart stories. So that's what we're trying to do is get back to that.
I love it so much. It's great. I'm dating myself because I remember the Twilight Zone and Outer Limits and all the other great shows.
Oh, yeah. Outer Limits.
Yeah. Addicted to all of them. And of course, one thing about you, Jeffrey, is, you're a devoted science aficionado. Early in your life, you were focused on space exploration and oceanography and meteorology. So take yourself back to when you were a young kid. What was it about all that really kind of got you going in the morning? And, why did you love it so much?
Well, I'll tell you, I was lucky enough to have parents who were, they challenged me. They took me places. They showed me things. They wanted me to question things. So I was always at the library. And when you mix going to the library with also watching the launches to the moon, right? Because it was when I was a small child, we were going to the moon, and so I was like, wow. When I grow up, I could go to the moon too, right? I want to go to the moon. And it really felt like a completely different time. It was like you could watch a show like Star Trek and think, hey, there's a through line from Apollo, the Apollo program, to the Starship Enterprise, right? You could feel like there could be a connection between those two. And if you actually, when you talk to a lot of NASA scientists and engineers, they were inspired by the science fiction of the time. That's what led them to become scientists and engineers. So I think that some of it for me was about engaging with the future that I saw just over the horizon, right? It didn't quite pan out to be the future. We have a future that's much more about technology, right? Than that sort of thing. Whereas the future that I thought we were headed toward was more about human exploration and really traveling around the solar system and living on the moon and living in space colonies and living underwater, undersea, stuff like that. So that stuff fired me up as a kid because I really, really wanted the chance to grow up and engage in that world. I wanted to be part of that world. So what happened for me was when I saw that that world wasn't really developing, I decided to tell stories about the world that I wanted to live in. So
I love it. Of course, Aquaman was one of my favorites, and that was more of a cartoon back in the day.
Sure.
Let's talk about this feature film. You've got the feature film Persephone and
Persephone.
Pardon me. Persephone.
Yep. Yeah. It's named after a Greek goddess.
Well, I'm glad that I got it wrong because I was going to say, where did you come up with the name Persephone?
Persephone was the Greek goddess of the underworld, but she was also a goddess of growth and fertility and things like that. So it was like in this story, we were going to Proxima B. So Proxima Centauri is in real life the closest star to our Earth, right? Other than the sun, right? The sun, we orbit the sun. The nearest star system is Alpha Centauri, Proxima Centauri, the 3 stars, and Proxima is the closest to us. So it's about 4.6 light years away. And in the story, we've got characters who have traveled decades across space to get there. Some of them in hibernation, and a couple of the characters we're going to meet were actually born during the journey. So, and one of the characters feels that it's an appropriate name for the planet. It's actually called Proxima B, but he decides to rename it Persephone. And there's reasons when you see the movie why he names it Persephone. So yeah, I think it's also kind of a lyrical, smart way of sort of talking about mythology and the past and that sort of thing too.
Yeah, it's really smart. And one thing that you love doing is you love teaching. I know that you love impacting young people. I know that you want to set a fire in young people's minds about the possibilities of life and the possibility of the future. Without giving us too many secrets, maybe you could share with us one lesson that you're trying to get across to people watching Persephone when they're going to be watching this upcoming feature film.
Well, a couple of things. One, it's got the movie has it's starring a young woman named Brianna Hildebrand. She was in the Deadpool movies. She's a great actor. And I would love for the girls, I mean, in the film, she's a pilot. She's flying this cool shuttle and she's adventuring across this alien world. And it's really cool. I'm hoping that girls could watch this film and have the same kind of inspiration I had when I was a boy watching Captain Kirk. I would love for girls to watch her and see this pilot, Darcy, her name, Darcy Clark, and see Darcy and go, I want to be her when I grow up. The thing I'm trying to make a movie that's accessible to general audiences. It's not just for grownups. It's something that it's not a family movie or a kid movie, but it's more like what Star Wars was like back in the 70s, where just everybody could go see it. So I hope that there's some inspiration when people see the science, the technology, the characters interacting with it, that they'll see a potential future that we may be able to have and explore. And that will motivate them to enter sciences, engineering, and really, it's one thing to want to be a TikTok star, or a YouTuber, but it's another thing to be an engineer or a scientist. And I think we need role models that push kids back toward those careers. We need more smart people these days, not just glamour.
I love it. And of course, you've unified your interests through your focus in entrepreneurship, art direction, science education, and really interactive media. And I would imagine that when you're putting something like this together, you have to have a great team. So let's talk about that.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about the team and what it takes
Sure.
together to get it done.
I work with a producer named Anne-Marie Gillen. We've worked together for a number of years. Anne-Marie was she ran Morgan Freeman's Revelations Entertainment for a while. She's got a great background and pedigree, and she and I have got a great partnership in terms of building and developing these films and projects. I'm working with another young man named Jorge Heredia, who's he's a producer, but he's also an actor, a very talented actor and TV personality. He's won multiple awards for that, and he's very, very good. And he and I are actually co-developing. He has a background in science as well. So we're developing a lot of these movies, and we're creating a film slate together of 5 sci-fi movies that are all in this. We call it the neoclassic sci-fi slate, or we might change the name to Neo Future. We'll see. But anyway, we're doing this slate of 5 films, and Jorge and I are kind of spearheading that. But I've got, like I said, I've got a killer team. Frederick Haugen, who's been my writing sidekick for almost 30 years. He and I develop a lot of stories and writing together and everything. And so there's some awesome stuff there. And I want to make a quick plug for the fact that a couple of our really our short films are going to be released on the platform called Dust in March and April. So Parallel Man is going to be on in March, and Oceanus will be on in April. And people will get to see all the great stuff we've done and what we're headed toward in the future and everything. So that team has worked with me to build all that great material and move it forward. Lastly, I want to say a quick plug to my investor partners who have backed my organization for the last 8 years and really helped me move it forward. They've helped me both with strategic vision, and they have a real passion and understanding for building businesses and entrepreneurship. And without their mentorship, I wouldn't be able to keep this thing afloat. So that's been tremendous. That's So yeah, absolutely.
That's awesome, Jeffrey. Now, everybody knows about Netflix, and everybody knows about, what's going on with the big screen. And I tell you, when I go to the movie theater, there's nothing like going to the big screen and sitting there with a popcorn and seeing that giant screen and watching a movie on that screen with all the, the sound and the bass. Is it different to produce something that's going to go on TV versus knowing that it's going to go in sort of the theaters and the big screen?
It's interesting because there's a possibility that in the end, Persephone will be a streaming film, that we may end up, going exclusively with a Netflix or an Amazon. Those are targets for distribution for the film. And then they would have a limited theatrical release. You could see it in the theater. Obviously we're shooting the film with anamorphic lenses with it's being shot for the big screen. No question. That said, I do think the pandemic has taught me, because I used to be a purist. There's 2 things in my life that I used to be a purist on until I learned about it. One was I used to think space exploration doesn't matter if there aren't humans doing it. And then I worked with the people at Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and I started really understanding what the robots were doing, and that the robots were just extensions of us, and that they're out there doing things that we can't do. They're going places we can't go yet, right? So I was like, that's cool. The other thing that I've learned is that the TV experience, by having a really good large screen TV at home, a good at home sound system, and projects that are really shot and formatted for that. I think you can create a pretty good at home experience as well, right, nowadays. So I used to be disappointed by the idea of my projects going straight to streaming, but I'm much more open-minded about it. The more that I think the pandemic taught me through my own experience of sort of being at home, that I could build my own entertainment experience that was satisfying and positive. So I'm not against it. And I think that our content could very much be, some of it should be geared specifically towards streaming, but there's nothing to replace, as you said. It was just like the movie Dune that just came out last fall. And if you saw that or not, but that's a film that, yes, it looks cool on a screen at home, but it's nothing compared to seeing it, on an IMAX and, at that level. So yeah,
it's so interesting. I think of you, of course, I call you the future dude. It's FutureDude Entertainment. I look at you as a zeitgeist or a forward thinker. Let's talk about it a little bit, because you mentioned robots.
Sure.
And that's, something that's kind of fascinating to a lot of the viewers. Where do you think it all goes? Where do you think the robotic sort of world goes into the future as we look at it?
That's an interesting question. I would say, let me think about that. Where are robots or AI, or what are you thinking? That kind of stuff?
Let's talk about robots. Are
robots
going up to Mars? Are we
well, I'll tell you what. I just saw, I don't know, at CES just recently, there was an android there that had facial expressions, and it had an AI system inside of it that, and it was able to answer questions and joke with people and have a witty repartee with them. Now how much that you could say that AI system really truly understands what it's doing, right? I don't know. I certainly robotics are heading toward a place where you have robots that, you look at the stuff that the Boston Dynamics, other companies are doing. I mean, there's no question they're going to outpace us pretty quick the way it's going. Right. I mean, and I also think that there needs to be a real study of the ethics of this and the ethics of creating robots and, robots that could hurt people, right? Robots that, here's the point. It's not that I think that robots are going to try to hurt people, but I think people try to hurt people, right? And I think the danger is we have to look at who's making the robots, why they're being made, what the intent is. I think the idea of automation to the extent that it's completely replacing human beings in certain jobs and professions, I think that's very, very dangerous. I think it's something that we have a choice in. I don't think people make it sound like it's a force of nature. Well, robots are going to replace us. Well, we're choosing to do that. Companies are choosing to do that. And I think it's funny being a futurist and into looking at the future. I think the human equation is always the most important factor. And I think that as long as these things are serving the human condition and we're able to move forward and do better as a species, great. But if they're to our detriment, because I keep seeing these robots now that are being developed, and then they're like, yeah, we might add some missiles to that. Let's add some machine guns to that. I'm like, well, okay. It's, at a certain point, this is something that could get out of control and it could be very, very dangerous. And people like Elon Musk have warned lots of folks. It's not just sci-fi writers that are warning us. If you look at science fiction, repetitively, this story of automation and robots and AI outpacing us and taking us over or overwhelming us, that's a warning. And it's something that we should heed. And it's not because the robots are evil. It's because human beings, can make decisions and do things. These robots are extensions of us. That's the point. Right.
Yeah. It's so fascinating.
So I don't know. I mean, so that's the kind of things I think about. I do have a film that I want to do about drones and warfare called Interface. That's one of the feature films we want to develop. And it's really about the idea of what happens when you get to a place that war and combat's being fought by drones in the field, robots and drones. And what happens to the human beings in that? What happens to the casualties? What happens if you just attack a country with a bunch of robots? That sort of thing. That's a story that we want to tell. And that's definitely a Rod Serling kind of story. You'll love it. You'll love it. So
I can't wait. I'm going to be addicted to it. Of course, you've only sliced out a certain amount of time today. I mean, I'm going to bring you back on the show. We want to talk about robots in this next, feature film you're going to produce. And of course, we want to make sure everybody goes to Dust and watches all of your shorts. I mean, it's just going to be amazing. Now, before we let you go, I have to get into entrepreneurship a little bit because we have younger entrepreneurs watching the show. Sometimes these younger entrepreneurs and older entrepreneurs even, they hit a roadblock. They hit a pothole in the road. Maybe they hit a wall. They can't get through. So maybe you could share some thoughts from your journey about what it takes to get through a tough time, what it takes to get through a roadblock as an entrepreneur, what it takes to keep on pushing and pushing to get the job done.
It's interesting. I think of two of my business partners in FutureDude, Lowell Gordon and Phil Hinderocker. They both are seasoned business professionals. And one of the things, when we're doing this thing and dealing with the film industry, for example, there are a lot of times where it's a very uncertain thing. It's not widgets, right? It's not widgets. You have to be very agile. You have to be prepared for the future. You can't waste too much time going down one path. It's almost like a Roomba vacuum. You're just suddenly just bouncing around the corner. You have to be willing to take risks and pivot. But they have to be calculated and thoughtful. You have to know how to manage a budget. You have to know how to project and sort of, have a sense of, I have to have some sort of a parachute here. I can't just run it all the way to the ground because something might go wrong, and I think that's been a key for me to stay. The other thing is I would say the number one thing that's really helped keep us moving is to be agile and to never have too much overhead with our business. It's like have the overhead that's really based upon the needs of the projects at the time. So like I know so many people who are like, oh, we raised some money. Let's get a big office and we're going to have parties and we're going to have all this stuff. And they're out of business in less than 18 months. Right. And, you know, and I've been doing this whole thing. I haven't been on anybody else's payroll since 1991. So, you know, it's going all the way back to that for me. And I've had times where I had months where like back around 2008, where I really struggled. And I've had other times where we did really, really well. And I think that the key has been consistency and thinking it through and being willing to learn new skills, to not just get stuck. You know, like when we were making, you know, I used to do a lot of marketing and promotional videos and stuff in the 90s. And I actually did some documentaries. I worked with Prince, did some other stuff around that time, Northwest Airlines. Stuff started to change where the freelance work was drying up because all the companies started moving it internally. And one of the things I did is I was like, wait a minute, this isn't working. What are we going to do? So my team and I learned how to do web development. So we taught ourselves how to make websites. And then we went out and marketed doing websites and that sort of thing. And then that changed. And then we went and did something else, you know, but we kept learning new skills that has kept us fresh and agile as entrepreneurs and kept us going. The last thing I want to make sure I explain too is why I call the company FutureDude Entertainment. I'm very much into the idea of popularizing science, and you know, like Carl Sagan did, and I was thinking about Bill Nye, the Science Guy, and those sorts of things, and how my work isn't just about space; it's about the future. And I started kind of doing this wordplay, and I was like, future. Okay. And I hit the word dude because it's such a sort of folksy common thing. So, right. So I put those words together. I found that I was able to register it, set it up, and I set up a blog called FutureDude that kind of followed me on my journeys to all these different, you know, areas of exploration. So, you know, science, actors, all these different people that I was dealing with. And then that blog took off and it did really, really well. So I decided to rename my company around the blog, and it's done really well for us. So I just wanted to make sure people are like, why does he call it that? That's how it happened. So yeah.
I love it. What a great story. We're going to bring you back on the show and talk more about, you know, what you believe is going to be the future. And of course, I know you believe like I do that it's going to be positive and powerful if we all work together and believe.
If we work together. If we work together.
Right. That's right, Jeffrey. Yeah. Listen, this has been fantastic. I mean, what a great interview. We're going to watch you on Dust and watch your shows come out on the big screen. And I can't wait to get my popcorn and watch everything that you're producing. It's going to be remarkable. So I just wanted to take a minute, Jeffrey, to thank you so much for coming on the .com magazine Entrepreneur Spotlight series today. This has been fantastic.
Absolutely. And Andy, it's a real honor and really appreciate you and look forward to connecting with your audience. Thank you so much.